Tom's going to spend some time talking about his journey as an artist and a person of faith. We'll have lots of opportunity to just talk about the issues that he brings up today and ask some questions. This is being videotaped, and I will put the podcast up on probably the websites for the Intro to Theater and Theater and the Christian, so you can take a look at this later if you want to refer to it. So, I'll get out of his way. Tom Keith.
I'm glad to meet you all, and I love this theater. I'm so glad that we can meet in this particular theater. I'd like to let this time be used in such a way that would hopefully meet your interests, and so I can answer the questions which you are thinking about or have, or interests that you have. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background so that you can know those areas about which you might want to know further. I'm originally from Birmingham, Alabama. I started my walk of faith on my 18th birthday. Went to University of Tennessee, married. After the summer, it's been 36 years. We have 3 sons, 32, 29, and 22. The last one just graduated from the University of Georgia, and he's in a band called the Bubbly Mommy Gun. And before that, he was in a band called the Ice Cream Socialists, which got some traction, but then they all moved away. My wife is a visual artist. She works in watercolor and oil and does collage, and she's completing a series on the women of Shakespeare, studying those characters through the medium of collage. I wrote this play that I'm going to perform tonight directly from the work of C.S. Lewis when I was 26 years old. I was commissioned to write it, and it was performed in Birmingham, Alabama at Sanford University when I was 26. That was the first time. It went all over the country for a couple of years, and it was interesting to me that in the late 70s, students, particularly at campuses like Fried-Hardman, were asking me questions which Cliff mentioned to me that might be of interest to you about being a Christian, a person in the theater. It's interesting to me that 30 years later, that question is still resonant. That might be a question I have for you, why that is still resonant. It's something I'd like to discuss. And I'd also like to discuss why it is of interest. Then I I wrote a play based on Dr. Clarence Jordan's Cotton Patch paraphrases of the New Testament, in which he paraphrased not just the words of the New Testament, but the events, and posed the possibility of what would have happened if Christ had been born outside of Gainesville, Georgia, about 1936, and came of age during the time of the Civil Rights Movement in the American South. Through a kind of remarkable series of circumstances, met Harry Chapin, the late singer-songwriter. This turned out to be the last music he ever wrote. Probably the only play that got great reviews from Rolling Stone and Christianity Today. Dave Marsh with Rolling Stone said he thought it was the best music Harry Chapin ever wrote. And he was a great humanitarian who raised millions of dollars for world hunger. And Bruce Springsteen still does a concert every year for that cause. I performed that off Broadway and toured with it for several years, and then we were ready to settle down. We were in Dallas, where it had run for 7 months, and I was invited to be a part of the Dallas Theater Center in Dallas, Texas, and our oldest at that time was ready to start school, so we stayed in Dallas for 2 years, and I worked at the Dallas Theater Center, and we really missed the East. Both my wife and I are from Alabama, and we decided we either wanted to move back to New York or to Atlanta. And we decided on Atlanta, and so we moved back there permanently in 1986. And I had several goals. One was I wanted to work with a company because most of the work I've been doing for about 10 years had been C.S. Lewis or Cotton Patch Gospel, with the exception of 2 years at the Dallas Theater Center and 1 summer at the Alabama Shakespeare Festival. And I wanted to get comfortable in front of a camera, I wanted to work with a company, and I wanted to write another play. And I had in the back of my mind that maybe I would want to start my own theater company. My wife, we had 2 children by that time, Simon and Stephen. They were just starting school, 2nd grade and kindergarten, and so she had a lot of freed up time, and she said, I either want to have no more children and go back and get a master's in special education and go back to teaching, which she had done before we had children, or she said she wanted to have a 3rd child and become an artist. And so she decided on the latter. We had Charlie, and she became an artist. And we moved to Atlanta. I worked a great deal with the Alliance Theater Company there for about 10 years, and did some film and television, and wrote several other plays, 2 based on books by Walker Percy, Lost in the Cosmos, The Last Self-Help Seminar, and The Moviegoer, which won the National Book Award. A novel from a former student, by a former student of mine, called Many Things Have Happened Since He Died, and here's some of the highlights. A comic novel that was produced by the Horizon Theater Company in Atlanta. I did my master's at the University of Tennessee on the Pilgrim's Progress, and my thesis was about adapting, the challenges to adapting religious allegory for the stage, and that actually is being published and coming out this year by Dramatic Publishing Company. Then, about 15 years ago, I started thinking it's time to raise the stakes again. And I felt like those things that I had come to Atlanta to achieve were, I felt like I was kind of at a level where I wanted to challenge myself again, which I think is important always to an artist. And we started thinking about moving to New York, back to New York. The day we put our house on the market, there was a windstorm and 7 trees fell on our house. So we took the for sale sign down and went to IHOP for dinner and changed our plans. And sometimes the circumstances over which we have no control, and sometimes we have plans, and sometimes it's a combination of the two. But nevertheless, I got a new vision of something I wanted to try with Cotton Patch Gospel, and that was to direct it for the first time. And I did so with a black gospel choir, and discovered, this is part of a long story, that the musical range that Harry wrote was a lot broader, could be a lot broader in its realization than 5 white guys with a traditional bluegrass kind of backup would. And it's not that this was better, but it was apples and oranges. It was like looking at it in a different kind of way. And I co-produced that production with 17 people. It was a real success, and I was planning on using the money from that to start my own theater company in Atlanta. And in the middle of that run, got a call from Theatrical Outfit. They had just lost their artistic director. And we started a discussion over the summer, and what I heard from them was they had had a real legacy of about 20 years in Atlanta. They had no debts. They felt like they had made a lot of contributions, but they were suffering what theaters were suffering at that time, which is what theaters have always suffered, dwindling audiences and support. And they felt like it was time to either grow or go. And so it was really a good meeting of purposes, and they had a board of directors, a space in which to perform, and so off we went. And I started that job in 1995. And we have three focuses. We say that we tell stories that stir the soul. And our emphasis is that because the place of an artist is always important to the work, we really emphasize the Atlanta theater artist who works on a national level and lives in Atlanta, so that we're really building a muscle of people that we worked with. There's a huge talent pool in Atlanta. One of the best actors in Atlanta we've been able to employ 3 times over 14 years. It's not like we can hire these people every year, but there's a fantastic talent pool that we're really committed to in Atlanta. The second is not just as theatrical outfit people, but as Atlanta citizens. We don't think there's anything more community building than the theater, and I can talk about that longer, because it's a language-based art form. And I think that America is America in part because the same ancient culture that gave us theater as we know it gave us the idea by which we govern ourselves. But more about that if that's of interest. So we felt like this art form really needed to be alive and well at the axis of our city in downtown Atlanta. A lot cheaper places to build a theater than downtown Atlanta, but that's where we decided that our theater needed to be. So 5 years ago, we raised $5 million and built a 200-seat state-of-the-art theater, 200 seats, and it was the first green theater in the country. We're the first theater in the country to earn what's called LEED certification, standing for Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, from the U.S. Green Building Council. We also just this summer were named the first theater in the country to be named by the Anti-Defamation League a No Place for Hate Zone, because of the nature of the plays that we do. And that brings me to the last, is that we're emphasizing the literature and music and themes of the American South. Because this part of the world is so rich in literature and music and our history and civil rights. It's not for nothing that this region is known as the Bible Belt. As Flannery O'Connor said about the American South, if it is not Christ-centered, it is certainly Christ-haunted. It's a part of the culture. And so we really want to capitalize on that, and we aspire to be the theater of record for the American South. Most plays we do are by or about by Southern playwrights or composers or about this part of the world, but sometimes not, because sometimes we can look at the same themes through a different prism. And that brings me up to now. So whatever might be of interest, I'm game for us to discuss. This summer I did a play, and the director decided it was called Blood Knot, and it's about 2 brothers, one light skin, one dark skin, living together in apartheid South Africa, and by Athol Fugard. And she wanted the audience to come in and discover me sitting on stage, because my character sits in this little hovel outside of a township of Queen Elizabeth all day. And it was an extraordinary experience to sit there in silence while the audience came in for 30 minutes beforehand. So I could do that here. I sort of got used to it this summer. It was interesting. It really forced me to concentrate. But if you ask those really questions you're really, really interested in, those pose the greatest possibility that we won't be bored.
What's one of your favorite works?
What's one of my favorite works? One of my favorite, it feels like I have about 5. When I started naming them, I'd probably it probably quickly increased. But one of them is a play that I'm going to direct at Westminster High School in Atlanta this year, Skin of Our Teeth by Thornton Wilder. It won the Pulitzer Prize. It came out in the mid-40s. The one thing that's so exciting to me about it is it's because it's so ambitious in its themes. The first act is basically the creation of humankind and the invention of the alphabet wheel, and it ends with the Ice Age coming on. There's this family that it follows, the Antrobuses, and they're kind of like the original family. And then there's this very sexy maid who is the kind of a narrator who hates the play, and her name is Sabina, and she's talking to the audience and saying, I don't understand the word of this play, this is the best job I could get. And she goes with the Antrobuses through from the Ice Age to then there's kind of like modern times, and there's a convention in Atlantic City and there's a flood. And then the last is they're crawling out from the debris of an apocalyptic war. And a theme of it is how the human race continues to exist, apparently by the skin of our teeth. And it's comic, but it's also with very serious intentions. I love the theater when you can go and be very, and laugh a lot, and then the next day go, oh my gosh, that was, and be thinking about it still. I think that art is always entertaining, but I don't believe entertainment is necessarily art. And I believe the difference is in the residual effect. I think that entertainment that's not art impacts us like mood-altering drugs. We really do feel differently. But once the drugs wear off, or once the entertainment that's not art wears off, the effect is gone and there's no residual effect. And to get it back, you've got to have more of the same. And that's why I feel that much of our theater today is emphasizing the least important element of theater, which is the spectacle. I mean, spectacle's interesting, but according to Aristotle, it was the least important element of the theater. It's not what really holds our attention or stays with us afterward. But I think that art, I have confidence in it, that it is always entertaining, in that it captures our attention, it makes us laugh, wonder, think, cry, and it leaves us either in a small way or profoundly changed. So, yes?
What brought you to traveling and doing this CSA's part? Because I know you're working in Atlanta, so
Right. I kind of backed into doing a one-man show on C.S. Lewis. I have to admit it, I was kind of a snob about one-man shows. I thought one-man shows are not real theater. And so I sort of chose not to go see Hal Holbrook do Mark Twain when he came to the university. And I thought I was, being a real theater purist. And then listening to everybody who had gone, I could tell that I had really missed it. And I had really missed something important. So I'll tell you a little bit about the faith journey, because that sort of works in here. Before I became a Christian, my best friend from the second grade through high school had become a Christian. And he was irritatingly, persistently telling me that I really, really, really needed to read C.S. Lewis, especially Mere Christianity, which I found very offensive, because I was a member of the Southern Baptist Church, and I had been baptized, and I thought, what do you think I am, a mere pagan? Why do I need to read this book, Mere Christianity? But he was my best friend, and so finally I decided, okay, he's my best friend, I need to read the book. And it's the only book in my entire life that I have ever gotten so frustrated with, I ended up throwing it against the wall. And I couldn't understand it. I felt like I was reading it because I was supposed to. and I just threw it against the wall. I just was so frustrated with it. Well, later I became a Christian, and then when I was married, we got the Chronicles of Narnia as a wedding present. And I thought, oh no, it's C.S. Lewis again. But I felt a little more open to him at this point. And his books at the time had some of the better covers in the bookstore, which was important to me. They didn't look cheesy or like they were trying to sell me something. And they looked interesting. And but I thought, well, this must be for our children when they come along. Well, my wife reads a lot more than I do. So she started reading them and saying, oh, and she started sounding like my friend, you've got to read these. So I was not. And one morning we were stuck in traffic when I was in graduate school in Knoxville. And she had The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe in the glove compartment. So she said, okay, just listen to the first paragraph. And she pulled it out and read that. And all I can tell you is that I was taken over by this compulsion. And I read all 7 of the Chronicles in the next 2 weeks. And I read all of his literature in the next 2 years. And then, kind of by accident, we were taking our son to his grandparents to sit in while we went out. For about 7 years we didn't have a television, and they had one, and I turned it on to public broadcasting, and just beginning was Julie Harris doing The Belle of Amherst, a one-person show on Emily Dickinson. And we just stayed and watched it. I was so captivated. And I thought, well, it really is a play. It's just that the protagonist and antagonist exist within the same person. And that's what could make the one-person form so compelling, because we all have an inner drama going on, and so it's really intensely examined in the one-man show form. And I thought it was fascinating, and so afterward I said, well, if I ever did a one-person show, it had to be on C.S. Lewis, because he's the only person I know that much and care that much about. And the next day, I had gotten a call. I got a call from a lady who wanted to start a poetry organization by and for Christians, and she wanted me to do a public reading of C.S. Lewis's poems, because she knew my work as an actor. And I was thrilled to find out there was this whole other form of C.S. Lewis that I didn't know yet. So I said, well, let's get together. And when I read the poems, she got me the book, I read the poems, we got together, and I said, how about instead of me just reading the poems, how about if I put together a one-man show and have the poems in it to punctuate the script, just like poetry punctuated the script in The Belle of Amherst. It's like music in a musical. It intensifies time, it changes the setting very quickly. And she loved that idea, so she commissioned me to do it for the first time. And that was in 1977. There was a good review, and people at Auburn University heard about it, and Fort Wayne Bible College heard about it. And I went there and performed the show. And then a year later, I was doing a musical review in Atlanta. And the producer fired the director and hired me to be the director. And he wanted me to do a song called For Unto Us a Child is Born. And it was a takeoff on the pornographer Larry Flint. And I said, no, I couldn't do that. I'm a Christian. And he said, oh, I love working with Christians. You all are economical and you're honest, and I'll buy you a car and I'll take care of your apartment rent and I'll double your salary and just, stick with me kind of thing. And I said, no, I really can't. So I gave my 2 weeks notice. And the only thing I had at the time I thought that maybe other people might be interested in was this one-man show on C.S. Lewis. I took out a little $35 ad in Christianity Today, Equity Actor does one-man show on C.S. Lewis. And in 2 years, it had had over 130 productions in more than 30 states. There was just this amazing hunger to be introduced dramatically to the author of these books, which had meant so much to so many. And it was an amazing experience. And I love the one-person show form now, and I think it's, I've also performed the whole book of Revelation. I did C.S. Lewis at the Kennedy Center, and the producers of it wanted to have me back, but they wanted me to do something different. And I had just read through the Bible that year. It was the only year I managed in my life to accomplish this, and I got the easiest to read translation I could. And in the translation I read of Revelation, I had just read this when they called, and it said in the first chapter, anyone who hears this book read out loud will receive a special blessing. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe that's how we're supposed to get this. Maybe we're not supposed to sit on our own and try to figure out the end of the world. Maybe we're supposed to hear this in a group of people. So I just mentioned that idea to these people, thinking they would never take me up on this, and I could tell, oh my gosh, they're interested. And I said, well, but I would need this and this and that. I mean, this would take a long time to prepare. Well, they got me everything I needed, and that's been an amazing thing to perform. Some things, what I've learned, can't be texted or tweeted or emailed. They have to happen, and they can only transact person to person and flesh to flesh. We have to breathe the same air and grow old together, 2 hours together. Certain things can't be passed on except person to person. And it's been an amazing art form to participate in. So doing the one-person show is great about learning focus, what it is to keep an audience's attention that whole time. But it's a collaborative art form too, and I really wanted to work with other people. So I liked having the balance of working with a theater company and from time to time going out and touring that as well. Yes, sir?
You already mentioned one case, but what's, you mentioned faith and theater making reconcile. What's the toughest time you had for that, the scenario that's been forced? Trying to reconcile the two.
What's the toughest time? I think maybe the toughest time was when I turned down the chance to do Harold Hill and the Music Man at the Alliance Theater in Atlanta in order to produce a musical version of my adaptation of The Pilgrim's Progress in Dallas. And I raised $200,000 to produce this, and it was from about 20 different investors. And one review said it was charming, the other review said it was terrible. All of the money was lost, and it was a tremendous failure. And I had $38,000 left to pay off after the production was over, and I was making about $350 a week at the time at the Dallas Theater Center. And I called 27 investors and said, I am going to pay you all, creditors, and said, I am going to pay you all back. Some people I was paying like $5 a month. And that was really a hard time. I remember one time I was driving back from Fort Worth, having gone to an audition, and I started yelling at God so loudly I pulled off the interstate because I felt like I was going to have a wreck. I was so angry with him because I thought, you know, this was all supposed to be for you. And, you know, to be on this classic, The Pilgrim's Progress, and so much energy had gone into it, and it had been, on the level of making its money back, it had been a failure. And that took me a while to process. By the way, after I got finished screaming at God, I could almost tell he was saying something to the effect of, do you feel better? And actually, it was a very strengthening time in my relationship with God, because yelling at one another is part of a relationship. It's part of intimacy. He's never yelled back, but he's made himself heard loud and clear. That was hard, but now it seems it seems all about my ridiculously limited perspective on the effects and impact of that production on the people who saw it and the people who were participating in it, and the great value of that, and what I learned in the process, both business-wise, and I doubled my income after that failure, just because I learned so much better about business matters doing that. I learned a lot about producing, and to learn anything, and I also I think I also really began to understand why theater has come to be regarded as a non-profit form, so that it's considered by the IRS an educational charity to whom you can give money and get a tax deduction. And I think I came to understand that a whole lot better, the role of a nonprofit theater. It's similar to a library. Literature would not survive, a bookstore can't survive just on the selling of literature. It takes the coffee shop and the self-help books and the calendars and a lot of other things. It's kind of like you can't run a grocery store just selling milk. So the libraries exist to keep literature and history accessible to the public. Well, dramatic literature is written to be performed, and that's what I believe we do in the nonprofit theater, is that we make the dramatic canon accessible to the public. And I believe it's extremely important that we are part of the civic discourse in the theater. I think that's extremely important. So that was a tough time. Another, and these are, if you'll notice, they're self-imposed. The other was when I became a Christian, I felt that I should believe that I should leave the theater, that I believed that I had a talent for communicating. And so I thought, well, it'd be a waste of time to be doing comedies and dramas, and I should become a minister. And so I left the theater and had nothing to do with it for 3 years as an undergraduate. And that was so hard because it was so unnecessary. And it was so, I would walk by the theater, and it was almost like being on a 3-day fast and smelling barbecue, you know? It was so hard. It was a palpable draw to go to get back to the theater. But again, I learned so much from that. As Babette says in that wonderful film, Babette's Feast, to the artist, nothing is wasted. And I don't think I could have ever written Cotton Patch if it hadn't been for those years as an undergraduate doing this work with these two Christian ministries. And that was great. And and I began to, the two things that drew me back into it, one was the example of C.S. Lewis, how with his mind, he could have so justified dedicating his life to the writing of theology and apologetics and made his whole career as a witness to the Christian faith. However, in addition to all of that kind of writing he did, he committed a great part of his life to the writing of, to scholarly writing and the writing of fiction. And that example was tremendously meaningful to me. And then here was the biggie that I kind of learned by trial and error. And that was, if the truth is the person of Christ, if Christ is the truth, and if art is about, on some level, capturing the truth, then I came to the conviction that he is present whenever art is achieved, regardless of the intentions of the artist. And I think that this is in part why our Creator has given us the ability to create. As the author of Romans says about nature, what we need to know of God can be known in nature, and I think the same is true of art. It's a means of revelation. I began to have confidence in it as what becomes present in art is Holy Spirit. It's kind of like Pentecost. People who shouldn't be understanding one another for a moment, particularly in the theatrical art form, are speaking the same language. So trying to fit myself into the role of a teacher or a minister, or trying to achieve something in the means of rhetoric or homily or persuasion, as opposed to art, which is a different form, was very difficult, and it was wonderful to return to the theater and now I don't. To me, I can't make a separation. I can understand how, on one level, sometimes if we do if I do a play like Cotton Patch Gospel or Revelation or C.S. Lewis on Stage, the content of that is based on Scripture or the experience of a Christian person. But I think it's important to remember that the word Christian is a noun. It gets very tricky to start describing plays or movies or bookstores or gym classes as Christian or people are Christians. And I think as I achieve art in my work to that degree, an opportunity has been created for Holy Spirit to be present. Whether the show is about a Christian subject matter or not, I believe Holy Spirit is present in the work of the art and will minister. One example is I did the role of Pangloss and Voltaire and the governor of Cartagena and all those wonderful roles in Bernstein's Candide. And someone said, well, how could you do something like that as a Christian? And what I thought about is that Voltaire has done a great service for the kingdom, because in this parody, he shows the foolishness of having a baseless faith. Pangloss, the teacher of these 4 children in this story, believes that this, erroneously, that this is the only possible world. So he creates this bad logic that since this is the only possible world, it follows that this is the best of all possible worlds. And he teaches these 4 young people a philosophy of a baseless optimism. And they go out into reality and experience murder and plague and rape and starvation and every suffering of humankind. And finally grow to a point of humility by the end of the play. And seeing we're neither wise nor bad nor good, we'll do the best we know, we'll plant our seed and make our garden grow. And it reminded me that that's similar to Jesus' parable about sometimes a tree has to be pruned. And I think our minds have to be pruned of bad ideas, of mistaken thinking. And so that might have cleared the way for a better thought. Like C.S. Lewis had when J.R. Tolkien said to him, you know the difference in Norse mythology and Christian mythology is that Christian mythology has a basis in history. And that one thought moved C.S. Lewis from an atheist to a theist. And then in a miracle, I think it was 2 years later, on his way to the zoo, well, I won't give that plot point away tonight. See that tonight if you come to see C.S. Lewis. Yes.
Tom, how did you make decisions about how to portray Lewis? Because is there video footage or film footage that you could draw
There's
from?
absolutely no film footage of C.S. Lewis. However, there are a lot of recordings of his, and the voice gives tremendous information. How we speak, where we place our voice. If I placed my voice in my nose like that and I talked to you this whole time, you would have had a very different experience with me than you would have had if I placed my voice where I normally do as Tom Key. Or if I placed my voice in my head, that's another kind of person. Or if I place it all here, that's a different kind of intention. So where people place their voice, or how rapidly they speak, or how much melody there is, or what lack of melody, all of that gives great information. Consonants tend to express intention, and vowels express emotion. And a lot of times in the South, it's so, we can just feel so embraced by, oh, I just love you, and how are you feeling today? And we can really understand how someone feels and things. Whereas the British, which is so emphatic on the consonant, we are so sorry that Diana died. We are so sorry. And actually, if you really look at my face, you can tell that I'm absolutely devastated at the tragedy of this. And so consonants can really emphasize the intention and vowels. So all of that was a treasure trove for me in how to portray C.S. Lewis. And he had a booming voice. It was very much out of his, it was well balanced, but very pronounced from his chest. And he wrote an essay called The Abolition of Man. And he's got this great metaphor, men without chests. And it's a great image. And it was part of the diminishment of the modern age to him. A kind of a lack of spirit, a diminishment of the human spirit. So that voice gave me a lot of clues. And plus he was born in Ireland and spent most of his life in Oxford, England. And it's similar to someone like me who grew up in Alabama and tries to pass, you know, as an actor in other situations without the accent with which I grew up. And so every now and then, his Irish would slip into this Oxford English, standard British. So I actually wrote out a phonetic alphabet according to C.S. Lewis and wrote the script out in that. And that gave me a lot of clues. And people who knew him say that it's accurate. I figured too, if he could hold audience's attention, he was a very popular lecturer, that he had to have a rigor to his voice. So, you know how someone talks, it gives you a lot of clues to how that person moves through the world. These are curtains, right? Oh, good. A dancer taught me an interesting thing once. What do you all think of as the windows of the soul? The eyes. This dancer explained to me that she believed the windows of the soul was the heart. And this is what she was talking about. Like, if I had come into the room like this and spoken to you in this kind of way, take out your books, I have a coat on, tie. That makes a difference in someone who's very guarded about their heart, as opposed to someone who, I'm glad to meet you today, good to be here, I'm making myself very vulnerable to be pierced. So we had 2 real estate agents come to who we were interviewing, who were going to sell our house, which is a big deal. You want to really trust someone. The first one was a guy with a coat and tie, briefcase, lots of material, brochures, calculator. He so had his act together. We felt like after an hour with this person, why did we ever invite this other person? Because he is just so businesslike, so efficient, so great. There's no need to talk to anybody else. The second person, woman, she's late, no briefcase, no nothing. She looks a little disheveled. She's very apologetic. She's very open. We had this great conversation. She got the job. And she was just so open. We knew that we could trust her. She wasn't hiding behind information and hiding her heart. So, C.S. Lewis had a great deal of courage. I mean, he fought in World War I. And there was one time when 60 German soldiers appeared out of the mist. And happily, they put their hands up and he took them all prisoner. But he had never shot any. I mean, people think of him as this Oxford Don who spent his life writing books, but he was wounded in the war. He saw people. There's this incredible section where he says, as for the rest of the war, the cold, the frights, the smell of the gas, the horribly smashed men still moving like half-crushed beetles, sitting or standing corpses, boots worn day and night till they seem to grow to your very feet, the sheer landscape without a blade of grass. I mean, he knew what war was. He might never have finished his studies at Oxford if he'd been killed. So I took him as very open, moving with a lot of robustness. Every morning he got up and bathed in this little lake up from his house. He walked every afternoon. He once walked 55 miles with Owen Barfield. So all of those were the clues I looked to. Yes?
What is or has been the most difficult part of acting for you? If that's been like becoming the character or talking to the audience?
Well, I think the most tedious part of acting is learning the lines. That's just something that after almost 30 years doesn't get easier. It's just not something I jump up and down for joy when I think, oh boy, you know, I got to get off book in another week. But I do it. And I do more and more get to where I appreciate the process and just kind of get more accepting of it. But my high school drama teacher, who was fantastic, said to me, the easiest thing an actor does is learn lines. And it took me till I was about 35 to understand what she was talking about. And I think what's really hard is how vulnerable I have to make myself as an actor. That's, I think, the hard part. Because I believe that acting is revealing who I am as is appropriate to the character in the script, and masking who I am as is inappropriate to the character in the script. Another school of acting believes that that acting is all about pretending, that it's all about lying. But I believe acting is about telling the truth. It's prophetic in that sense. And this school of acting that believes I'll fool you into being who I'm not with my body and voice tends more to the mimic. And I can admire that technique, but I'm never convinced that this is really happening to this person. Whereas when I'm watching someone who is revealing who that person is as appropriate to the character in the script, I feel like I'm a fly on the wall watching a real event. I think part of the reason the popularity of reality shows, which even now began to have a kind of contrivance about them, is that we're hungry to understand what real human behavior is. What's going on behind other people's closed doors, in the kitchen, the bedroom, at the office, in the boardroom, in the war room, on the battlefield, and not talking about it or a journalistic point of view, but forming it in a meaningful way. And so to reflect that honestly, it's scary. What if I reveal everything about who I am and people are just bored? Or they're offended and angry? But it's also so freeing. There's nothing more freeing. It's why I keep doing it, because it's still such a thrill. It's such an amazing thrill. And especially working with others in an ensemble. Yes?
You mentioned before, while we were talking, that you're not only an actor, you're a producer and you're a writer. Do you have a certain passion for what you're doing one more than you're doing another?
That's a good question. One thing that impressed me when I went to England the first time is that it reminded me of people in Atlanta. I never met anyone who just said, well, I'm an actor, or I'm a playwright. I'd meet people and they say, well, I'm a playwright and I have a children's theater company. Or I'm a theater publicist and I'm a director. Or I'm an actor and a director. Or it was as though people were cobbling together a life in an art form. And acting was what drew me into it. And I'm not the kind of director who wants to direct just anything. But there are certain stories that I feel like I can crack open in a way that nobody else can, and that really interests me. And then as a producer, I feel like there are the great reward to me as a producer is the realization that this theater building, this production wouldn't be taking place unless I had created a need and went to the people who could fund this and match them with the creative resources. And that's so rewarding. That is so incredibly rewarding. And connecting actors to a script and watching them take off with it and grow. So I think I love all of those aspects. I'm sure that writing is the most challenging. That's probably the most challenging. And yet that's a great, I was commissioned, this is something I might do, I was commissioned to write a piece as a part of a play that was done in Atlanta in a theater about twice this size at the Alliance Theater. It's called the Hurt Stage, and it was a play about faith, and it was called Leap. And it was 6 of us. There was a composer and 5 actors, all coming from different kind of faith traditions. And we were asked to write a monologue about how faith works in our life. And that was an incredible assignment, because I was writing this piece not to perform for a religious audience, a church audience, or even as an evangelistic piece, but for people who are paying about $30 a ticket and perform 8 times a week at a professional theater company. And yet I'm writing about how I became a Christian for this audience. So it was really, really challenging. Usually if I get a production date or a commission, that will force me to go ahead and get it done, and then I'm very happy that I have. Yes?
You mentioned something about dramatization of religious allegories. You said you had a master's in it. I was just wondering if you could explain more of that, and how do you take a religious text and put it on stage?
Well, with the Pilgrim's Progress, when I proposed this to my graduate thesis committee at the University of Tennessee, they thought it would not work. They said, first of all, it's didactic, it's preachy. Second of all, there's no real characters. They're allegorical figures like patience, faith, hope, Apollyon. And thirdly, there's no dramatic suspension, because we all know that good's going to win out over evil. And one of them said to me, you do one scene of this in the church, you'll see immediately it doesn't work. So the only thing that we could do, the only thing that I could do, the only recourse I had was to say, well, let me try it. I'll produce a version of it. So I was given a budget of $50 and access to the costume shop and props and set, and students could audition, and it could be student staffed and all of that kind of thing. We needed 7 actors, 6 showed up for the audition, so I ended up being in it too, and directing it. We were in a 150-seat black box theater. Opening the same night, next door at the Clarence Brown Theater, a theater in the Round with about 300 seats, was a production by the Clarence Brown Theater Company, which at the time was run by Sir Anthony Quayle, a professional theater company. They had a big professional budget, theater twice the size. By the time the 2 runs were over, we had done twice the box office business as the professional theater company. And all of my graduate committee said, we don't really know how to explain it, but it works. It just works. And I'm not sure either. It's so interesting, the craft of theater. I think it boils down to individual gift and vision. And if an artist sees, hears, it was the first play. I was reading The Pilgrim's Progress and loved the literature. As I walked through the wilderness of this world, I lighted on a certain place where was a den. And I laid me down in that place to sleep. And as I slept, I dreamed a dream. And behold, I saw a man clothed with rags and a great burden upon his back. And it was so beautiful. It was such beautiful language, and a great theme of mine is people on a search. And that was true of Binks Bowling in The Moviegoer. Someone on a search. And I was so compelled, and it was the first book that I had ever read. I was an English undergraduate major, but this was the first book that I had ever read. When I started seeing the actors and how they would be costumed, I thought they would have 17th century designs, but made with 20th century material. And I could hear the tone, and I wanted harpsichord music, and I just could see it. And it was funny to me, it was engaging to me, it was interesting to me, but it was all in here. So the only way to prove it was to put it before an audience. And the great risk of being in front of an audience is they're not going to care. But they cared. They cared for Pilgrim, Christian or non-Christian. There was one, we used to have these funny sort of mocking awards, and the young woman who got the award for the worst mouth in the theater department, we had about 150 theater majors, came to see it 7 times. She was Jewish, so she wasn't coming to the material from the same religious background that I was. But this is part of why this story has transcended cultures and generations. Next to the Bible, this book has been published more than any other. And part of the reason the Actors Union was begun, and part of the reason of the beginning of the Civil War, what led to it, was the enormous, insatiable appetite that the American public had for Harry Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin. Not just as a book, but as a play. And there were multiple productions of it on tour around the country. So I can give certain theories, but I think bottom line, it goes back to those elements that Aristotle defined. There has to be action, the movement of the human spirit from one place to the next. Not a car chase, but that kind of action. Action and change on a human level. Then plot. Then character, language, and last spectacle. And also character, I think one reason why things endure or are interesting are because character, human beings, are something that's made to be eternal. And so they transcend plot. And I think that person, like Pilgrim in Bunyan's allegory, we all identify. He has a vision. He's got a burden on his back. There's something that's worrying him. There's something that's weighing him down. And he's married and he has a family. He's part of the community. And yet he sees this vision that life as he knows it is about to collapse. And if he doesn't get out, he's going to be destroyed with it. Well, that drama's extant everywhere, every day with us to varying degrees. You know, if I don't do this, life is not going to become meaningful. I'm going to uncreate myself and who I think I am. And how do you, and then all of the obstacles on that way of any human endeavor. So, Christian or not, any human being that's interested in going from one place to the next can become captivated in his allegory.
it.
What do you feel about feeling awkward as an actor if the character you're acting, portraying is not supposed to be awkward? How do you feel about an actor who is awkward all the time or feels awkward?
You mean
Should you feel awkward as an actor?
doing an awkward character?
Not doing an awkward character.
Not doing an awkward
Just
character.
Acting.
That's a really interesting question. Give me another word or two that you think would mean the same thing as awkward.
Uncomfortable.
Uncomfortable.
By things you have to do.
Pardon?
By situations that you're portraying or anything like that.
I think that's a red flag. I think that's a danger sign. And let me explain why. If I don't understand what I'm doing as an actor, then the audience is not going to understand. They're going to be confused. The only thing that I have ever found that will alienate an audience is if they're confused. Because an audience comes wanting to participate with you. They want to be interested. They want to be entertained. They want to get caught up in it. So the only obstacle that I have found over the years is if because of the play or because of the production or because of the miscasting of an actor or the misconceived notion of the director, they're confused, that's when an audience gets uncomfortable or hostile or bored or vows never to go to the theater again. And that's not good. Now, on the other hand, so I think I've got to understand what I'm doing and be able to justify it. On the other hand, it doesn't mean that what I'm doing is something that is easy or comfortable. For example, in this play that I did this summer that I was talking about, The Blood Knot, 2 actors in a 2.5 hour long play, one black, one white, same mother, black, different fathers. I've been passing myself off as a white Africana after about 15 years to come back to live in this hovel with my brother. Tensions build, and in the last act of the play, we're playing this game that turns violent, and I start beating him with an umbrella. And it was a very shocking scene, and calling him the N-word, and very violent, very degrading. That was never comfortable for me. And I would be worried about myself if it were. But I understood where it was coming from. And I understand that that place of violence exists in me. I also understand that if we keep these mysteries of evil within ourselves in the dark, they're only going to grow worse. And part of the healing power of the theater is that it brings the mystery of evil into the light. And we can begin to understand it. We can begin to understand and heal and move forward. So another way of putting it is a director once said to me, you have always got to be in control of the scene. The scene can never be in control of you. And I think that's a good, or another way I've heard this put is keep a cool mind over a warm heart. So it's kind of a balance. And I think if there's another kind of discomfort that can come, not because I think the language is bad or there's too much flesh exposed, because the worst language is used in the Bible and God created flesh and sex. What has been uncomfortable to me at times is just something trying to come off as art that really isn't. In other words, it's a quality issue, not a moral issue. It's just a poorly written play or a misguided director or an actor that was cast in the wrong role or who lacks talent or training. And that could be a discomfort of something that it's not functioning, it's not working. And existentially, experientially, literally, when I've been a part of that kind of production, it's almost as though it's hard to breathe on stage. It takes so much more work. Whereas when I'm in a production that's going well, there's evidently this inexhaustible source of energy, which is kind of a great life lesson. So those are some thoughts about that.
I think we have time for one more question.
Do you like, have you ever had to maybe like talk to your director or turn down a role because of like, because you're married or something you don't want to like, you know, like, do you give your wife like a role about kissing in plays or whatever, or just curious, I guess?
No, we've never talked about that in the rule, in the sense of, well, let's have a rule book.
Yeah.
You know, I think mainly we trust one another, and she knows I'm acting, and you know, when she was drawing and there were nude male models in her class, I wasn't asking her questions about, you know, it's just what she needed to learn as part of the craft. That's really not been an issue. Again, the only time we really, part of that experience that was so terrible with the failure of Pilgrim's Progress, it was creatively a failure. I didn't allow the adaptation I believe in, but I didn't allow enough time for the composer. He was really kind of writing music for another approach to the Pilgrim's Progress, so it didn't have that sense of unity that every work of art needs. It never added up to more than the sum total of its parts. And she, after the first time she had seen it, said, I don't like it. And I knew she was right. And that was so hard to hear from her. So again, it kind of goes back to, it was more of a quality issue. What she has a problem with is if she thinks I'm getting, is if she thinks I'm not doing my best work. That's where we have our heated discussions. Because I guess it's a human thing, but the temptation is once you do one thing and it works, then there's a sense of, oh, that's what you're going to do, you know, your whole career. So it's always been important to keep challenging. And C.S. Lewis on stage still, the older I've gotten, the more I've been able to lean into him. The truer I've come to trust. It's like visiting an old friend in a way.
That's an interesting expression. Been easier to lean into him? What does that
Yeah,
mean?
I'll tell you where I got that from. We had a person come to our adult education class where I go to church in downtown Atlanta, and he was Irish, and he was talking about Seamus Heaney's, whose name I cannot pronounce, and this is being taped. Seamus Heaney? Seamus Heaney? Seamus. Heaney? Seamus Heaney. Anyway, Beowulf. He was talking about Beowulf. And after he got through this discussion, someone said, well, what do you think about Angela's Ashes? Now, I've not read Angela's Ashes, so I'm not saying something personal about Angela's Ashes, but this is what he said. He took a long pause. He went, and finally he said, I think it's a bit of a lie. I don't think it's a book you can lean on. And I thought, what a wonderful measure of anything. A friend, a work of art, can you lean on it? And even though this was a guy born in 1898, died the same day John F. Kennedy was assassinated, 1963, people still pay attention to him, which is pretty wonderful.
That's a great place to end. And we'll look forward to seeing the show tonight at 7 o'clock in Lloyd. Thank you so much, John.